He just snapped, I imagine. He's been waiting his whole life to do something like that. He used to shoot off at me all the time for being brave, being proactive, being Roman, basically. It was obvious he was just scared of trying anything himself. But there you go. A few decades later, he finds some barbarian village and pays a load of dumb locals to die for him so he can get himself a little throne to sit on. I wasn't even the first in the palace to hear about it. Oneni storms into the court, ready to explode. I almost didn't recognize her. She didn't really say anything. Would have been pointless, of course. But I think she probably wanted to go back there herself and murder my brother. The guard Decurion is keeping an eye on her for now, until she cools off. I do get it, though. The same kind of thing happened to Rome, but in reverse. And I certainly felt the need to kill someone because of it. Only at least Caledonia will actually be improved by that invasion. Julianus, the Senate tells me, is a better ruler than me or father. No idea what exactly that's meant to mean. And no idea why the Senate thinks I care. We'll just have to see where he takes things, especially with all the sops in Gaul going along with him. Maybe once a few of them die, they'll realise they need proper leaders, like the flourishing land of Roman Thrace. That reminds me, has there been any word from Aurelianus? He must be about to engage the traitor legions. He'll be fine. Now, someone go find my son. I won't let him skip exercises today. Hello and welcome back to Fields of Mars. In the previous episode, Julianus went to sneakily annex the Caledonian capital of Eildon, using Caledonian separatist forces to do pretty much all of the work and easily winning the battle. But then the Caledonians had an army in southern Britannia that came to try and take some revenge on us. It was another classic settlement defense that went relatively easily, with the slightly novel feature of the enemy completely spamming war dogs against us. But it was to no avail, and we did win the battle, so now we're here in the results. It was a heroic victory, very few losses on our side. The enemy army pretty much taken out of action. They've still got some of those war dogs though, so now they're even more of a spam war dogs army, proportionally anyway. They'll have to go off and sit in the attrition over winter, so they're just going to get weaker and weaker. They probably can't pose much of a threat anymore. And now we have another settlement defense because a giant rebel army at Thessalonica comes to attack the city, and Aurelianus with his main force is inside. The balance bar's super far in our favour because the rebels don't seem to have an actual infantry component to their army, so they can't really storm this city properly, but they do have lots of good siege equipment which will help them out. If only they had that infantry, they'd be a really well balanced army. Now, similar to an attack that happened at Tarentum in this series, I wanted to just fight this battle because big city siege defences are rare, so I just wanted to see what would happen, even if it's not very much. Now, there were a couple of unique factors to this battle. One is that this is actually an Eastern-style city, so we get to fight on a different kind of map to usual. And the other is that the enemy took me by surprise by basically doing something which they should do all the time. What they're doing here is just attacking with their ranged weapons as the battle gets started. They've got these gigantic onagers, large onagers they're specifically called, which are just absolutely ridiculous, and they are flinging flaming shot towards our walls, and I really expected the enemy to just charge in with all of their men right at the start and just have the onagers firing during that charge, but they actually did the right thing here, which is open the breaches before they get to the wall. Almost incredible. It doesn't happen all that much. So they managed to open the gates, and I thought with the gates open suddenly they would then charge forwards, but no, they're actually going to take this to the correct conclusion of opening up the maximum possible number of breaches before getting into range of anything that I have. So they're going to start shooting the walls as well. I had to evacuate my archers from those walls to stop them from getting killed by these shots, and slowly they opened up two breaches which kind of joined together into this large breach here. So they've got two different ways into the city, the gatehouse and that breach, and then the onagers did something I'd actually never seen in Attila, despite having played it for more than 250 hours now. They fired this kind of explosive shot which acts like the flaming shot, but it works on concrete ground. Normally the flaming shot only really works if you fire onto grass, and if you fire onto solid ground, the fire doesn't spread at all. But these ones seem to be some sort of explosive or shrapnel-based shot that has the same effect as the flaming ones, but it works on this hard ground, so kills a few men with every hit and looks absolutely deadly, mainly because it seems to spread gore all over the place, even though it doesn't actually kill very many of the troops. So it certainly looks devastating, and our men are going to have to run through that as they prepare to receive the enemy's infantry, who are now advancing. Our towers can get to work, and we can get hurlers and archers up on the wall ready to take our defenders' advantage, because now they're going to be able to hit the enemy at close range with very little threat of repercussions. And the hurlers in particular are going to be super strong against pretty much everything the enemy can deploy against us here. Their heavy infantry will go right down to hurler fire. The archers probably will actually barely do anything, but they will contribute at least to reducing enemy health. These javelin men will have a great time as well, standing on the still somehow holding together gatehouse, where they can shoot these guys running below at point blank range and kill more heavy infantry. They will take fire from the many crossbows the enemy have brought, but luckily crossbows are more of an anti-heavy infantry unit, so against skirmishers they're somewhat wasted. And speaking of wasted, in comes everything. The enemy just piling units through the gatehouse here, but we've just put some pikes at the top, these mercenary Germanic pikes, and the enemy's cav in particular are going to have zero chance of getting through that, and we've got heavy infantry behind ready to move in if the pikes do get broken up. At the same time, our legionary cav, who were hanging around outside the city and had to wait until now to attack since the enemy had actually kept their formation together very intelligently, they can finally go in to take out all of the crews to the enemy's long-range weapons. They also sent troops through the breach in the wall that they made, where I had some Legio Comitatenses waiting for them, and they did this sneaky trick shot, throwing a massive sea of darts into the sky that then fell on the enemies waiting outside the breach, getting loads of kills there. So in come the enemy's infantry. These Limitani border guards that the enemy has somehow managed to deploy, one of the worst Roman units, are going to have absolutely no hope. And pretty soon, it's all over. The enemy assault groups were just annihilated as they came in. There's one guy escaping, but that story is not going to be the same for most of the enemy. Bodies all over the floor, absolutely destroyed. And they still had their general out there, but my cavalry went to finish him off, and with that the battle came to an end. So they got off to a really good start, those rebels, but they threw it away just because they didn't have the army composition to actually make a siege assault. Ultimately, they didn't have any infantry, so this gigantic rebellion has now been easily crushed. Incredible what they'll do for a lie. It seems crazy that one man could twist so many to him. What argument could convince any reasonable mind that they are not better off under the new empire? Can't get over it. And it's probably not going to get any better then, since if they are able to be convinced to fight us at all, then they probably won't learn the lesson from today. These people don't want to be Roman. That's the crux of it. Insanity. What are we meant to do to convince them? They can't have really been happier under that Arya regime. Distant overlords who just throw out their laws without a care for anything but the money being dragged back. Maybe no one even remembers what it was like under the old empire anymore. The rebel army absolutely annihilated in that fight, of course, and our losses negligible. We took a few losses to ranged fire and some on those pikes when the enemy did charge in, but really nothing special, and we can take on warriors to negate those losses somewhat, and since that was right at the end of an end turn sequence, we'll immediately get our turn lead replenishment as well, meaning Aurelianus basically hasn't lost anything by the end of that fight. Alright, hacking through a lot of bad news, including disease and impending rebellions all over the place. I wanted to just check out Thessalonica to see the damage, because the sieging always does some damage. I want to repair the main building because we need to convert it back over to a Roman settlement so that we'll have the full garrison available. Now here's one of the places that's going to rebel, Octogeron, and my plan here, since it's so isolated, is to build the chain where it increases the size of your garrison, thinking that basically we might be able to get a garrison so large that a rebel army, which is limited to 20 units of course, will never be able to take it. So we can hold this place indefinitely without actually sending forces over there. It will mean that the food draw and just general purpose to having this in our territory is going to pretty much disappear, which is unfortunate, but we'll just hold it for prestige reasons if we can. Now here's the main concern I have at the moment. There are two Sassanid armies waiting near Constantinopolis, and checking their movement ranges here, I noticed that they can attack any of the 3 settlements nearby, and that's really inconvenient because we can't just sit in one of the towns and wait for them to come and attack it, because they might just go and attack the one I'm not defending. So really we need to push out towards the Sassanids in order to try and find a choke point so we can hold somewhere a little bit more secure and we don't have to be dancing around and worrying about where the enemy are going to go. Now Julianus needs to continue his campaign to secure Britannia entirely, and first he needs to take down the Caledonian separatists who are currently just raiding right outside Aildon, very annoying. So we attack them, they run away through the attrition, which is good for us. I'm not going to bother chasing them because they can't take anything, and because of climate change you basically can't move around up here in spring without taking serious casualties to your armies, so we'll just let the enemy enjoy those casualties and take them out later on. And then the other threat Julianus will have to worry about is the Caledonian army to the south. It's mostly war dogs, but it's going to keep spamming mercenaries to get itself back up to strength over the next few turns most likely, so we'll probably have to worry about it at some point, but it's unlikely to take a settlement. Now, I was able to assign a new governor, and I wanted to assign one to Thracia. We'll see why I'm able to assign one in a minute. But while I was here, I noticed that Julianus has some good news. His son is now the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, so that's a very strong connection for us to have. I also noticed that Aurelianus only has 1 child, so he needs to get to work in order to keep expanding the family and giving us some new offices at some point, preferably. But yes, good news for Julianus. He'll have some nice leverage over our allies now that his son is their leader. Now, back to the governor thing, I wanted to appoint this young lad, Septimus, the son of Constans, as the governor of Thracia. So basically, Constans is going to get his son to help him out ruling his new little patch of the world over here. He's only 18, and he looks exactly like Tullus, but hopefully those things won't hold him back from being a great leader under Constans. Now, switching back over to the west, the reason I was able to appoint a new governor is because Uther, the final son of Constantinus, who hasn't really taken part in the campaign so far, is finally now going to have his time to shine. I took him away from being the governor of Caledonia, and he is now going to come in and basically become the leader of all the territory we got from the Hispanian Roman separatist faction. He'll take over their army at Burdigala, and he'll now be responsible for maintaining these territories. He's already really high level thanks to all the experience he got from governing, so that'll make things a bit easier. But he is going to have a pretty large challenge because the territory here stretches across 3 different provinces, which means he has 3 different public order bars to manage, and they're all going to be dropping constantly and having rebellions. There's one already down there I'll have to look into. And there's the rebellion near Octoduron. We've almost finished that building to get our garrison up, so we should have the garrison powerful enough in time to stop that rebellion. The Caledonian separatists were willing to bribe me into not killing them, but Julianus is not going to accept this because he wants a rather more unified and pure, perhaps, Britannia, getting rid of all the Caledonian influences. And then we actually see a rebellion appear and instantly attack our settlement, our northernmost one in Gaul that I forget the name of. It's actually still a barbarian settlement, so we don't really get the proper garrison here. However, the enemy army attacking is so weak that that might not actually be a problem. The AI is basically messing up once again. I thought I'd fight this battle quickly because it's sometimes interesting to fight the battles with really low numbers of units because you can focus a lot more on the specific tactics of what you're doing with them. Now, how the battle went depended pretty much entirely on what they did with their onagers. It's possible they would learn the lesson from the command at Thessalonica and actually just attack all of our stuff with the onagers before they do anything else. But luckily for us, they're not going to learn that lesson. They're going to do the classic move, which is to just kind of fire with the onagers while advancing, meaning they won't get to use all their ammo, and those advancing forces are just going to come in one at a time and be in big trouble. So here are their cavalry, which rush over this little hill, discover all my infantry waiting behind, who give them a nice volley of darts, and now they'll come in for a melee that they can't win. So we'll just leave our Legio Comitatensis there to push through, while our tower is now going to work on the enemy's advancing forces. Their Cairo Ballista back there can't see us, so it's advancing right into the town to try and get line of sight. So basically it's been absolutely wasted. Those cavalry also absolutely wasted in a different sense, and our men will now form up, still wanting to stay behind that hill, as I said, to stay out of the line of sight of the Cairo Ballista and force it to come inside. And I'm also trying to get the enemy to come up to that barricade so we can do the classic darts at close range trick. And all the way they're walking towards us, they're going to be pelted by the tower. So this is all going pretty much perfectly. Now their general comes in to challenge the barricade, and we're going to do the trick, so we'll start inflicting big losses on them. The only problem here is that the onager, which has been trying to hit my tower, has dropped a few shots onto the barricade by accident and actually damaged it, so the barricade doesn't have that much health left, meaning the enemy are going to be able here to destroy the barricade while my men are still here shooting at them. I think we just about got off all our ammo just as the barricade dropped, so maybe it was okay, but ultimately it doesn't matter because in this melee we'll win as well, because Palatina guards are far inferior to Legio Comitatensis, and we can rear attack them. So we hit them with some darts from behind with that second unit, then come in to surround and ultimately destroy them. Their general not going to have a very nice time, and the Cairo Ballista crew, which has just finished reaching the town, is immediately assaulted by the Legio and will have no chance whatsoever. I think we just wiped them out in seconds and they're going to be gone. And the Onager crew has actually dropped the Onager and is now rushing into battle to come and join the melee. The wrong choice from them, perhaps. So they rout, that ends the battle. The enemy general's unit tries to escape from its encirclement and is absolutely slaughtered. So that is one more rebellion annihilated with really no problem whatsoever. A nice cheeky heroic victory, and we'll even sell the prisoners back to someone to get some money, and a rogue onager goes off to menace the countryside. While I'm sure it can be brought under control, you haven't exactly given me much faith that you will keep your end of the bargain. As it stands, I may as well do nothing at all, for my name will remain unknown once you show up all of a sudden and lay claim to everything. I won't simply forget Caledonia overnight. I have the worst troops, the worst enemies, the poorest lands, and now I'm sitting about as far from any of our capitals as I can get. I hope you'll understand my frustration, and that if I come across as rude, it is for reasons quite beyond my control, clearly. If you want a quick way to make me happy, you can get the Senate to make me proconsul. They're doing anything you say these days, aren't they? Time to finish off those separatists. We chase them north towards Tuasis, where they now get stuck in a battle both against Julianus and the town's both garrison army and the army standing there to keep public order, just a small army of low quality troops. And overall, we completely annihilate them, so that is very nice. There is now no threat of an alternative Caledonian government being set up anywhere, so Julianus will have to start marching south to take out the original Caledonians, who are now a Horde faction. He's probably going to get caught out in winter though, because it's autumn right now and he's so far north that he won't be able to get back south before the snows come down, so that's going to impede his progress and may delay this project a little bit. Uther going to move out for his first action by chasing after the rebels down near Pompolo, the Hispanian former capital, and they actually move into a position where they're in reinforcement range of the settlement, so that'll be a nice easy battle then. He attacks with all of his Western Auxilia Palatina, a terrible army, and the garrison army coming to reinforce is probably more powerful, and together they can certainly take down the rebels, so Uther just throws in all his troops with an aggressive chance to go and overwhelm the enemy, and they seem to do just that. And that's the end of that rebellion. Basically, he'll have to move back and wait for more rebellions to appear. Now against the Sassanids, I'm working towards going to actually attack them, but because I lacked just about enough movement points from Aurelianus to go and attack them thoroughly right now, I'm going to try and draw them out this turn. So I'm just putting my armies outside the cities, because sometimes the AI will like to go and attack a field army just because it's not behind the defences, and in that case it will be a 2-on-2 fight I think we can win, and there I'm eyeing the auxiliary barracks, which we really need to build to start replenishing our forces around here, because the two armies are kind of scrappy. Now, we happen to be at war with the Angles. This reminded me, because they were coming to ask for peace and even paying me for it, which was great because we actually really need the money right now. We're very low on funds thanks to our nice expensive armies all over the place. Now, at the start of the next turn, Constance's daughter is apparently eloping with Theodosius, our admiral. Apparently she is unsuitable for marriage. It doesn't really specify why, but anyway, I have the option here to either have Constance force this to not happen, or to just ignore it, and she will go off to marry Theodosius, and I guess Theodosius will become a family member. I chose to intervene because I had this vague memory that Theodosius was some kind of terrible officer who we definitely didn't want to marry into the family, and I went to check this out. You can see his stats are really low, some of the lowest I've ever seen, and he has some really bad traits. He's disloyal to our empire because we've passed him over too many times. He's also flaccid, he's blind, and is in his mid-60s. Overall, this does not seem like a suitable match for Constans' 18-year-old daughter, so I think I made the right choice in saying that he would probably intervene and prevent that from happening. So with that sorted, we now have our movement points back, so I could consider attacking the Sassanids, but actually, I lied just now, I don't have all my movement points back. Constans had his movement points sapped by an agent at some point in the end-turn sequence, and he actually can't reach the enemy, so I couldn't go and make the attack I wanted to do. So instead, we're going to have to once again try and just get them to come near to us by walking towards them and just standing there in the field. So we've choke pointed them, so that's nice. Now they can't walk past us, so at least the cities are safe. They'll have to fight a field battle to get past us. And what I wanted to do was to have Aurelianus come just in front of Constans and fortify, since he has the movement points to do so. So hopefully the Sassanids will regard him as the closer army and then attack the fort rather than the field army, just to make any potential battles here a little bit easier. And indeed, the Sassanids did actually come and do that, just as I expected, although they did bring a surprise. A third army appeared from nowhere, so now it's 3 stacks attacking our fort, but the balance bar still actually slightly in our favour thanks to our superior quality of troops. So it looks like we've got a decisive engagement on our hands now. We've got a massive stack of cavalry coming from this first army, loads of cataphracts and loads of crossbow cav, a very unique unit which is also very powerful and very difficult to combat, which is inconvenient for our heavy infantry based forces which can't really deal with skirmishers. We will have the fact that we have fortifications on our side, and the towers will help deal with skirmishers somewhat, so we'll have to rely on that. That second stack bringing tons of infantry, mostly infantry skirmishers and random spears. The third army, more generic spears and more misc, cataphracts, crossbow cav. Basically, this is a battle where the enemy army is going to take a lot of micro to bring down, and we can't necessarily do that, so we'll just have to see how it goes. With ease, the tribal leaders were subjugated before me. Those that resisted were outcast even by their own people and forced into the countryside. The hunt was short and decisive. As we marched back south, we came upon the Great Wall of Hadrian and realized at that moment how it had become a relic of a bygone age. There was no Roman Britain, no barbarian kingdom. There was simply Britannia, the jewel of the new Roman order. Atop this jewel I stood with a mixture of pride and reverence. I saw the same sense of history in the eyes of my troops. All knew that we had made good on the promises of the Empire, and that now only scant work remained before Britannia would be truly free from suffering. On this misty day, Aurelianus forms up his men inside his fortification here, ready to receive the Sassanids. We've got some stakes outside to stop cavalry, and our infantry covering all of the entrances. We want at least 1 unit on each entrance, because the enemy can come from any direction, technically, in these battles. And because of the mist, I actually couldn't see where the enemy army was until it was right next to the fort. So I basically didn't have anything to do. I just sat there waiting to see what direction the enemy were going to come from. In the meantime, I did have the chance to get Constans' army onto the field, form it up and start marching it towards the fort. So he is bringing in perhaps a more powerful army than Aurelianus has to command, so we'd like to get those guys into battle as soon as possible. So eventually some Sassanids do show up at the fort to start testing our defences, and here on the south side the legionaries will simply go into action against all of these Armenian spears, against which they have an advantage but are severely outnumbered. Our ranged units inside the fort aren't going to be too useful really. I wanted to shoot over the top into the blobs of enemies, but it just doesn't really work like that in Attila, unfortunately, so you're more likely to shoot your own troops in this scenario, and I'm pretty sure I did a fair bit of that in this battle. Not to mention the towers, who are really useful for killing enemies. They'll gradually grind down the enemy over the course of the battle and kill hundreds of enemies, but they will do the same thing to our own men as well, because they're so inaccurate. Now the enemy have their skirmishers, going to have the same problem as mine in that they'll hit their own men, but they have the nice advantage of having so many lower quality men that hitting their own men is probably worth it if they manage to kill some of our troops. And another skirmisher related problem is from these hurlers, because units won't fire at things they can't see, so inside the fort they can't see over the wall, so if you order them to attack something, even if it is in range, they'll run over to one of the gaps so they can see what they're firing at, which is a bit of a shame, so I had to micromanage those troops to stop them getting themselves killed. The main problem here is the enemy's crossbow cav, because crossbows are really good against heavily armoured units. They have armour piercing damage and they have relatively good accuracy and range. So the problem we're going to have is that these legionaries are gradually taking casualties due to that sustained crossbow fire. You can probably just about see it on the screen. Tiny bolts flying in and killing some of my legionaries. One unit there already taking decent damage. And you can see how this other unit, which isn't under crossbow fire, has basically taken no damage at all, fighting just as many or perhaps even more enemy melee units at the same time. So it really is the crossbows doing the damage here. Now the enemy's general was just wandering around outside of the fort, and I'd sent my cavalry out to go and try and kill some of the enemy skirmishers, and these two units who were chasing down some slingers accidentally ran into the enemy's general, and spotting this I decided to order them to just continue that fight because the enemy general only had half his men left, having sustained damage both from that accidental charge and from tower fire. So we had a chance to take him out. Need to do it before all of the billions of enemy units getting closer arrive. They're all just channeling themselves into these 2 points on the fort, which is nice. We're not being attacked from multiple sides, which gives us room to maneuver, and of course means the enemy aren't going to use their strength properly because so many units will be stuck in the queue to fight. We do manage to kill their general in that cavalry battle, so that's great, and I expected this to actually cause a few enemies to just rout right away, but it didn't really have a big effect. It's probably because the enemy have quite a lot of tier 2 units. All of their generic spears are tier 2, and their cav and crossbow cav are higher tier units as well. So they just have more morale in general, so aren't routing because their general's dead. Plus it's on very hard, of course, which buffs morale. It might actually work on lower difficulties. But anyway, in this case, we're going to have to just continue the grind as the men keep pushing into our fort, and we'll just keep trying to kill them. I'm slowly taking casualties, of course. I've got enough men inside the fort to last for a while, though. We can push in reserves, and eventually we'll have Constans's men to push in there as well. And here come the first of Constans's troops. It's the Germanic cavalry, who right now are just attacking these shattered units. I didn't want to go right into the fight where the enemy's main army is, because they have so much stuff that isn't really deployed, like these skirmishing units, that the cavalry could actually have difficulty. If there's enough skirmishers, they can bring down cav with minimal casualties just because they can all fire whilst other ones are running away to dodge the cav. So I start bringing in some to hit the most isolated unit right at the back, these archers, but an enemy cavalry unit comes in to join the fray. Now I can do 4-on-1 against this unit technically here, so I was fine to let them do this fight, but the enemy's crossbow cav proved to once again be my downfall, because they started just doing these cheeky trick shots over their shoulders back into this fight. And as that fight goes on, even though I do have the melee advantage and can surround the enemy, those crossbow bolts are going to do their fair share of damage. The enemy have opened up another front at last here on the west part of the fort, but it's not going all that well. They're fighting my inferior units, the cohort auxilia, but they've already taken losses there, and the tower is going to be a big help taking out those blobs of enemies. And here is a real blob of enemies. They've just thrown, like, I don't know, 15 units of Armenian spears into this one battlefront and stood them all on top of each other. So we got this nice little pattern here, and I thought I might as well take a picture of that. Very nice. Use that as a desktop background. So while they're all attacking that one side, the other part where they were attacking is actually now kind of clearing up. You can see we've got a Cairo ballista crew who've gone out to fight the enemy. They were chasing some unit that they lost line of sight on and rushing outside of the fort to see them again, so just about managed to catch them before they got too far out and bring them back in. It's a good thing the enemy did stop attacking on that front as well, because really we don't have that many troops left inside the fort. We're pretty much out of men, and with all those Armenian spears pushing into the other entrance, we might need to divert troops away. Constans's army is about to arrive though, so that should be able to help, although it is going to have to contend with the arrival of another enemy army as well, which we'll get into next time. As the amount of territory that the Britannians controlled increased, they faced the problem that had beset their parent empire. More border meant more groups who could pose a threat were now in easy reach, and more troops were needed to keep those groups in check. And that cost money. Money that the world's shrinking economic systems were not going to provide. The solution was the same one that the old empire had taken: to heavily dilute their elite armies with more common types of soldier. Even on the front lines at Constantinopolis, less than half of the Roman forces had undergone legionary training, and those that had were being expended at a tremendous rate. Thus, an economic revolution was needed to save the military one. Thank you so much for watching. We'll have more from that battle, and I'll try to clear up the mess around the rest of the Empire in the next episode of Fields of Mars.